When we were still living in the bush at Larder Lake, I used to like to stand outside and watch my dad saw logs. He had a large bow saw and he'd go back and forth, and it was a very rhythmic sound. He would also chop wood and kindling, and it was very interesting for me to watch. I was 5 years old around that time. And he would say sometimes, "Yep, we're going to move out to BC," which is British Columbia, the westernmost province in Canada. And then sometime he'd say, "Yep, we're going to move to Vancouver." And I said, "I thought we were going to move to BC." And he said, "Vancouver, BC, same thing." And I tried to figure that out for the longest time, how Vancouver and BC could be the same thing. He could have explained it a little better, I thought. But that was all the information I had, and I kind of had to learn on my own later on that Vancouver is a city and BC, or British Columbia, is one of the 10 provinces in Canada. And we did move out there a few years later when I was 9 years old, and I'll tell that story. I used to talk to my brother Don. He was 5.5 years older, and I learned a lot from him. He would explain things. He said, an airplane, a jet plane, can go really fast. And like really fast. And I'd say, can it go like this fast? I'd push my hand through the air, and he'd say, much faster than that. So I'd go as fast as I possibly could with my hand through the air. And I said, it couldn't go this fast. He said, yeah, it goes even faster than that. Maybe he had to think about it a little bit, but. And I had no conception of something that could go that fast. I saw the birds and the squirrels and things. Maybe automobiles even went faster than I could move my hand, but I didn't figure that out. And then he said something really interesting. He said, if you start walking and you keep walking in a straight line and you keep going, you'll eventually come back to the same place. And I tried to figure that one out. I thought, well, if you just go like in a perfectly straight line and you go kind of out into space and you keep walking, maybe space is curved somehow and you'll get back to the same place. Of course, it would take a long time. And then I also considered that the earth was round, and if you just walked around the earth, you'd get back to the same place. But I didn't know much about that at the time, but that was kind of my early interest in physics, and I've continued that interest in quantum mechanics and relativity and things. And it's still a real strong interest with me. But my brother taught me a lot. He taught me how to make roads out of tar in the sand. We had an old stove out in, I think we called it the sand pit, and he'd get a fire going in there. I guess he was 11, and I was too little to do that myself. The fire would get going and he'd heat up this can of tar. I don't know where he found the tar. And when it got all hot and kind of liquid, he'd pour it on the sand, and somehow that would make a road, a very narrow road, but when it hardened, it was like an asphalt road. And these things that he did and talked about just really fascinated me. I didn't have anyone else that talked to me in such depth about scientific things. And years later, when we were long past grown up, I asked him, how he knew those things. And he said, oh, I learned that from our even older brother, Bob, who was 11 years older than me. I never talked to Bob about things like that, but Bob did show me how to work on cars and change brakes and different things. So I got my start in mechanics from Bob. Another thing, while we were still living in the log cabin, my mother said that she would like to have a flower bed under the kitchen window. And she often mentioned how she'd like to have a flower bed. And so I thought, well, that can't be too hard. So I kind of cleared an area outside the kitchen window and I found this old bed spring. And I put it there under the kitchen window. And I thought, I don't know if that's exactly what she wants, but that's kind of a flower bed. I guess it's a bed anyway. And it turned out she didn't particularly appreciate that flower bed. And I realized it wasn't exactly what she wanted. She also talked about having a duck pond, how she'd like to have a duck pond. So I got a shovel and I started digging. And at 5 years old, you don't dig very fast, but I thought I was making pretty good progress, and I knew it would take me maybe a number of days to make this duck pond, but I worked at it, but she didn't seem too interested in what I was doing. I don't know. I thought I had a good chance of success, and then somehow we'd get some water and put it in the ditch that I dug. But anyway, I think it was not long after that we moved, so I abandoned those projects. So, as I mentioned before, we moved to Blind River town and we had a house with regular electric and plumbing and everything. I had a friend, well, I got to know her next door neighbor. Her name was Anne, and I thought I could spell her name because it was in the Dick and Jane book, but it was a different kind of an Anne. So one time we were right by a river, and I think I got my feet wet in the river, and I was really concerned because my mother never wanted me to get cold or wet because I'd been sick when I was younger, and she always tried to keep me warm and dry, and I thought, oh boy, I'm going to be in trouble. So Anne helped me, and we put some sand in my socks to try to dry them out, and I don't think that worked very well. And I don't remember what finally happened, but I think the socks were still pretty wet. And that didn't work out. But there was an interesting incident. Uh, Anne's father had a dock at the back of his property on the river, and he had a rowboat, and maybe there was another boat or two, but a few friends were there, fairly new friends, and they said something like, I bet you can't take that boat out and row it in the river. Well, I had kind of studied rowing a little bit. I'd seen how they grab the oars and you move the oars kind of back and forth and up and down, and I thought, I'm pretty sure I could do that. So I got in the boat, and my friends helped by pushing me out in the river. And next thing I knew, I got the oars, but the whole thing was too big for me, and I couldn't get the hang of the oars. I later became really good at rowing a boat, but when I was 5, not so good. So after a while, the current was carrying me away, and my friends were all cheering me on. I guess, or no, I think they started to panic when they saw me drifting down the river, and I was pretty panicked also because even if I had been able to row a little bit, I think the current was stronger than my rowing ability. But fortunately, some Indians who lived across the river, they came by in their canoes, and they pushed me back to the dock and took me to shore and rescued me. And I thought, I'm really happy they came along. um, so that was neat. So that was in Blind River, and I took grade 1 there. We call it grade 1 here in the U.S. We call it first grade. But grade 1, and our teacher, Mrs. Doherty, taught us phonics. She was real big on phonics, and I thought that was great. That it teaches you how to pronounce words that have, like elephant, PH. You might not know how to pronounce elephant otherwise, but if you know phonics, that PH is an F sound, and many other words are like that. then you can pronounce any word. And I really appreciated learning phonics. And then we moved to another town called Elliott Lake. There was I think it was the world's largest uranium mine at the time, and my dad worked there. And my oldest brother, Bob, worked there for a while when he got older. And so Elliott Lake was an interesting place. There was lakes where we would drive to and we'd go swimming. And I think my brother Bob carried me out one time. He thought maybe I could swim back, but I just kind of went into panic mode. I think he set me on a stump that was submerged under the water, and the idea was I would jump off the stump and swim to shore, which wasn't very far, but that was beyond my bravery to do that. I did learn swimming later on. I had a friend. I think I attended the end of first grade there in Elliott Lake, and second and third grade. And I had a friend named Douglas, and Douglas had polio, I guess, and he had a metal kind of a tube around his arm to, because it was probably fragile and he had to keep it strong. So Douglas was a great person to have on your soccer team or any other team, because he would just kind of go ahead and all the other kids would run away when they saw that metal thing on his arm. And if they didn't run away, he would kind of butt into them with the metal and they would scatter pretty fast. So everybody always wanted to be on Douglas's team. And he was a pretty good soccer player too. So Douglas and I one day, I don't know how we came up with the idea, but we thought it would be nice to build a log cabin. I'd seen pictures and you kind of crisscross the logs on top of each other, and then pretty soon you have a little house. And so we went walking in the woods down below my house, and we were looking around and we saw a really nice tree. Perfect. It was probably under a foot in diameter, or maybe around a foot. And we thought, oh, that's a perfect log for our log cabin. And so Douglas had a carving knife with him, a kitchen knife, and he started kind of whittling away at this tree. And I said, that's not going to work. That's no good. I knew my dad had a big bow saw in the basement. So I went and got that big bow saw, and Douglas and I got on either end of the bow saw, and we started sawing through that tree, and pretty quickly we were able to saw through it. And then the tree started going down, and I kind of looked up and it was falling towards some power lines. And I thought, well, that can't be good. I should get it to fall in the other direction. So I got behind the tree and started pushing it away from the power lines. So when, I knew that couldn't be good if it landed on the power lines, but I wasn't able to push the tree back, and so down it went and hit the power lines, and all these sparks started flying, and a fire started in the grass, and we went running as fast as we could to my house, not too far away, and we hid out in the basement, like some kind of fugitives or something. And we were like, oh man, what did we do? And after a while, my mother called down the stairs into the basement. She said, Kenny, the electricity is out. Do you know what could have happened? And I think we were so scared, and we felt we really needed to confess. It was the only way we were going to get out of the situation. So in chorus, when she asked that question, how did the electricity go out? We said, we did it! And she said she didn't know what we were talking about. But finally we climbed up the steps and we went down to the woods where the tree had gone down, and there was fire trucks there and reporters and everybody. And then they put the fire out pretty easily. But then we tried to convince them that we were the ones that cut the trees down. We knew we had to confess. It would just go easier in the long run. And at first they didn't pay any attention to us, but they finally started to believe us. And I said, and I got kind of under the tree and I tried to push it off the power lines. And they said, you couldn't have done that. You'd be electrocuted. And I said, well, I don't know, but I tried to push it off after it landed on the power lines. And so the reporters asked us questions. I think we got on TV and radio and newspaper and everything. But I guess people were grateful that I wasn't electrocuted. And I didn't know anything about that, but I just cared about that tree. So then the owner of the tree came out. It's kind of like that movie, It's a Wonderful Life, where Jimmy Stewart rams his car into a tree, and the man comes out and said, that tree has been in my family for generations, and you ruined it with your car smashing into it. Well, the owner came out of the tree that we had cut down. He had planted that, some years before, and it was his favorite tree and everything, and we cut it down, and we thought, boy, he's all upset about his tree. He doesn't care that we just about got electrocuted. But anyway, we did a bad thing, but we didn't really get punished for it because we were survivors, I guess, was the main thing. And I had a story to tell for years afterwards. Elliott Lake, I remember looking through a neighbor's window and I saw television. I think I'd seen it maybe in a store or something. This would have been around 1958. And that was an amazing thing. And I think I saw part of the show Lassie that was on. And it was just fascinating through the neighbor's window. And then we got a television not too long after, and we started watching, the shows that were on at that time, Gunsmoke and different things. I think Mighty Mouse was one I liked to watch, and he's like a superhero. And then I heard about Superman, and I imagined that maybe I could be Superman and I could fly around in a classroom in school because it was pretty boring otherwise. Okay, that'll end the particular session for the moment.